All right, so a couple things off the top. First of all, a little sparse today. I know fall break is this weekend, but you still kind of have the expectation of completing the Module 7 quiz, which will pop up as soon as we're done with class. I actually think I have it set to be released at 4:30. You also have a Module 8 reading, which will pop up after class. Same kind of thing. Those are due at the end of the day on Monday, all right? I'll also put up some class questions that we go through at the end. Those will be due before we start class the next time. So before we start class on Tuesday, I would suggest trying to do them this evening so you don't forget about them. Other than that, I also updated those two class questions. So they're now out of 4 points instead of 3. So you kind of should see your scale version. You kind of have the original still here, but the ones kind of factoring into your grade are now these ones that are worth a total of 4 points. Okay. So I'll try to make sure I don't make that mistake moving forward, kind of making sure these are always set at 4 points on top hat, so I don't have to kind of do this conversion. Other than that, let's see if I remember or forgot anything. Any questions? Oh, CL sessions will be kind of, I put up an announcement right before class. But if you're going to be around over fall break and you want to still attend those CL sessions, they're going to be going on just like they usually would this evening and on Sunday. With one exception, there's one room location Sunday that the CL leader will not be in town, and so they're going to be gone. So there'll be one less location, but every time slot still has a location. So if you want to go to those on Sunday, those are every time slot has an available kind of CL leader there as well. Yeah. Whatever room number I put up here, I forget what it is off the top of my head. There, yeah. So what is it? 4057 doesn't have one. So that 4075 and that 1049 room will still have people there. Yep. Any other questions for me before we kind of dive in here and try to finish up Module 7 this week? Yes? No? Okay. So where did we leave off? Okay. So we were talking about positive and negative externalities. We're going to kind of talk about those in the context of different types of goods today. So we're doing like a little bit of review of what we talked about last class, a little bit more focused on calculating deadweight loss, calculating producer consumer surplus last class. Here it's going to be a little bit more big picture and how do these connect with things we see in the real world. So we'll first start out before we kind of get back to those externalities, thinking about what we're going to call the Coase theorem, right? So Coase's theorem says, okay, we know that the production or consumption of some goods causes negative or positive externalities, right? Additional benefits or additional costs to people outside this market. So what will end up being true is it doesn't matter who has the rights to decide whether or not production increases or decreases or at a certain level. As long as we allow people to bargain, right, we will always end up at that socially efficient quantity. So we're saying if the market doesn't factor in the people's costs or additional benefits outside of the market, we end up at a quantity that's not socially efficient. But if we allow them to bargain, I have a kind of quick, simple, really dumb example of how we can still see us get to that socially efficient quantity. And I'll point out after this, when we couldn't look at the kind of graphs, what that's going to look like. So let's go back to the kid's book, right, where the dog named Spot. So Dick's the owner, right? And there's a huge negative externality to him owning this dog. I'm sure my neighbors think this of me sometime, right, which is that the dog is loud, right? So Jane incurs this huge additional negative externality. She doesn't own a dog. She's not a producer or consumer of dogs, right? But she's still incurring this additional cost, okay? So the socially efficient outcome is going to be whatever maximizes the total surplus between these two individuals. Here, our entire society is just two people, makes it a little bit easier. So we're trying to maximize their total surplus. So if Dick values owning the dog more than kind of Jane has as an additional cost, we should see that the dog stays. If Jane values her peace and quiet more than Dick kind of values owning the dog, we would see that the dog goes away, right? That would be kind of our socially efficient outcomes. So if we allow there to be bargaining, even if we don't mandate this and we just allow the market to operate at will, we'll still end up with our socially efficient outcome. So when you think about case one, so let's say if you had to put a dollar amount to it, Dick says, you know, I'd pay up to $500 to keep this dog, right? This is how much I value owning this dog. The neighbor says, well, there's this huge cost to me. I can't get any work done. I work from home. And so I'd pay up to that cost of $800 that I'm incurring from all this loud barking. So if we allow these two individuals, right, we kind of make a decision as a society, well, the benefit to Dick is 500, the cost to Jane is 800. So what would like the surplus value be here? Benefit of 500, cost of 800. How do I calculate consumer producer total surplus? It's the difference between marginal benefits and marginal costs, right? Now, sometimes if we're looking at consumer surplus, it's the marginal benefits of consumers and the marginal costs of consumers. But here we're just thinking about the entire economy. So it's the difference between the marginal benefits and marginal costs. Here it'd be what? Negative 300. So what would the socially efficient decision be? Get rid of the dog, right? Because if the dog's around, our surplus is going to be negative 300. If it's not around, our surplus in this easy example would be 0. We've maximized total surplus. Okay. So the private outcome would be, let's say we allow them to bargain. So we don't just make the decision for these two individuals. We don't just look at kind of what's best for society. So let's say that Dick owns this dog and Jane comes over and says, look, I'd pay you $600 to get rid of it. Well, what would the surplus value be there to Dick, right? We only valued having this dog at 500. So if you get rid of it, it's kind of like his cost is 500, but he's being given $600 from his neighbor. So it's like he has a net positive of $100. Now for Jane, yeah, she's spending 600, but if the dog hangs around, what was the total cost to her? So she's actually $200 better off, right? So if we allow these individuals to bargain, there's any possible price in between 8 and 500, they can come to an agreement where if it's 600, 700, 750, Dick would be willing to get rid of the dog for that amount. Jane would be willing to pay that, right? So it doesn't matter if we make the decision kind of from society, like collectively as society, or we allow these private individuals to kind of bargain back and forth, we still end up at that socially efficient quantity, which is the dog's gone, right? So we can think about kind of another scenario. So let's say case 2. Let's say it's the exact same kind of costs and benefits here, negative externality and the marginal benefit to owning the dog. But instead, we give Jane the right to kind of have the final decision about whether the dog stays or goes, right? Is there any amount of money, right? So if we're making this decision from the social standpoint, same thing, right? Cost of 800, benefits of 500. It's better for society for this dog to just go away. Now, Jane, if we allow bargaining and she has the final decision, what could Dick try to do? He could try to offer her money to keep the dog. The problem is, what's the highest amount of money that he'd be willing to offer? So if we're thinking about what's the highest amount of money that Dick would be willing to offer? Well, he values having the dog at 500, so he's only going to offer a price up to that amount, right? He's not going to pay 600 to keep the dog because he doesn't value it that much. So anytime we kind of have this gap here, if Jane has the right, there's no amount of money that Dick is willing to offer, and Jane makes a decision, we're getting rid of the dog. It doesn't matter who's given the right to make this decision, right? If we allow for bargaining, we'll always end up at that socially efficient quantity. All right, the socially efficient quantity here, we had negative 300 surplus if the dog stayed, so the kind of equilibrium. The socially efficient decision was to get rid of the dog. Now, what if we flip kind of the values, right? So let's now say that Dick values having this dog at $1,000. Jane still has the same cost. Now, it doesn't matter who has the right to make the decision. Let's say Dick has the right to kind of keep Spot. Well, the socially efficient quantity now, the marginal benefit is 1,000 to society. The marginal cost is 800. So what should we do? We keep the dog. What's the surplus to society? 200. We get rid of it. 0. The dog's gone. Right? There's no additional cost, but there's no additional benefits. If we allow them to bargain, even if Dick has the right, well, Jane is not willing to pay any amount of money over $800. Right? So there is no amount of money that Jane is willing to offer Dick that he's going to accept, because now if he values the dog, maybe arguably correctly, at a higher amount, right? There is no price that Jane can offer him. She'll only offer up to $800. He's not willing to accept that, right? Because if he takes 800 and gets rid of the dog, well, he just lost the marginal benefit of 1,000. So if we allow people to bargain, we would still end up here at that socially efficient outcome, which is Spot staying, right? So kind of quick, dumb, stupid, like two-person, society examples. But you can kind of see here, if we allow people to bargain, we're always going to end up at that socially efficient quantity. So maybe we shouldn't be as concerned about negative positive externalities. but there are some things that can kind of get in the way of Coase's theorem working, right? So this is the old, right, stupid kid book. So what are some things that can get in the way of this working, right? So why should we maybe still be concerned with these positive negative externalities not getting to that socially efficient quantity? Well, in our kind of a example there, even when we had a range of possible values that both people could kind of agree on, where they were both better off, right? What if instead, to make that agreement, they couldn't do it civilly and they had to hire lawyers? Well, now the cost of what Jane would be offering Dick would be whatever she offers to them plus whatever she has to pay to the lawyers, right? So if lawyer or transaction costs were really high, well, now maybe if I have to pay a lawyer $3,000, the bargaining process becomes more expensive than just living with a dog, right? And so transaction costs can sometimes get in the way of Coase's theorem working out, right? If we have to pay significantly high costs in order to kind of bargain with each other, then maybe we see Coase's theorem not work. Also, people kind of just get stubborn. So even if we go back to this example where we said Jane could offer Dick any price in between 500 and 800, and they both be willing to agree to that price, like $600 was the one that we went with. However, what agreed upon price would Jane like, or what would she like that value to be closer to? 500, right? She wants to pay as little as possible. What value would Dick want that agreement to be closer to? So even though there is a range, we both have incentives to kind of be at opposite ends of that range. So what can happen? When you see people like Swords is probably a good example of this, where you see people like holding out for these contracts, they can't make an agreement with the team. There's going to be a number that works for both of them. They're both just kind of being stubborn. Eventually, see it happen. Something play out. But people will hold out for a really long time, right? They want that agreed upon price to be closer to the end of that range that benefits them, right? So sometimes we see that break down Coase's theorem as well, right? And then the third and final one, this one, it's a little bit outside the context of this class, but worth mentioning since we're having a discussion. The more people you get, in our two-person example, two neighbors can come together and make an agreement about, to do something. What if I tried to make an agreement about, I don't know, maybe you guys pay me to give you a certain grade or something in this class? There's 300 of them, right? The more people you have, it's just going to be hard to coordinate, right, what that actually agreed upon price is. And so it also not only becomes more difficult just logistically, but it can raise transaction costs. The more people we have, just the more costly it is trying to get everybody together to kind of try and make this agreement. So we can't see Coase's theorem break down because of these reasons. But in general, we do see that markets, as long as we allow them to people to bargain, will arrive at that socially efficient quantity. And I'll kind of point this out when we look at a model here just a little bit. So just kind of a summary of what we talked about last class and kind of leading us into the next topic. We said with negative externalities, that meant that people outside the market had additional negative externalities, additional costs, positive externalities, additional benefits to other people, right? I've got some examples here. We use a lot, flu shots, immunization. I think I brought up, you guys getting a college education. Another kind of good example is like historic buildings. Quite often you don't see like private individuals buying a 120-year-old building and then like fixing it up and living it. That can occur. More often, these old historical buildings, who owns them? Government, even if it's a local government, right, that's bought it and kind of revamped it. And so unless we have some type of government intervention, we often see that not enough of these historic buildings are kind of purchased and like revitalized. And then, pollution, whether or not that's like noise pollution in our kind of dog example, or like with airports, but then also kind of just general pollution. We're talking about things like, litter and things like that. So how do we solve these problems? So if we have negative externalities, people aren't taking into consideration the additional costs, they're going to choose a quantity that's actually to what? So if I don't factor in cost at all, I'm going to choose to do too much of something, right? Because even though there's a benefit, if I don't factor in the cost, maybe I'm like, oh yeah, there's an additional benefit, I should do it. Well, not if the additional cost is also really high. So when we have negative externalities, if people in the market ignore these, we actually end up at quantities that are too high or higher than what society would like, higher than what would be efficient for society. Increase society's total surplus. If we have positive externalities, if those consumers, producers aren't factoring in these additional benefits to other people, they're going to actually be choosing quantities that are too low, right? They're not factoring in all this additional benefit that might come from this good. So how can we fix these things? So we'll look at the first one here. Think about if I did have there we go. So we had demand, supply. If I did have additional costs, now, anytime you're solving a problem, what we said last class is the way that I would model negative and positive externalities. So negative externalities are always additional costs. So what represents costs? So I should kind of model these through my supply curve. So if I have higher costs at every quantity, because there's now this additional external cost, my marginal social cost curve is a little bit higher than my private marginal costs, or it looks like a decrease in supply. So the market got to this equilibrium quantity, or would arrive at this equilibrium quantity and equilibrium price. Society would like for the quantity to be lower, and as a result, kind of what that socially efficient price would be that leads us to that quantity would be a little bit higher than what the market arrived at. Okay. Now, one thing that we talked about that could solve these negative externality markets is how can I shift my supply curve, or how can I decrease my supply curve? I could tax producers, right? So what's that going to do? It's going to decrease my supply curve until I choose the perfect tax such that the supply curve plus the tax is exactly equal to my social costs. What would the value of the tax be there? My external cost, or the value of that negative externality. So we can kind of get back to that socially efficient quantity using government kind of intervention with taxes. Now, if I just allow people to bargain here, we can think about there's going to be people in society where for every value here, the marginal benefit to the person consuming that is less than the total cost to society. So you can kind of think about it as there are values in between here where this person would be willing to take a higher price not to buy that good, and this person would be willing to pay that price to avoid the additional cost. So when we're talking about that Coase theorem, if we allow this market, if we allow the government or allow individuals to kind of go back and forth, there will be people willing to pay these prices to get rid of this quantity, and there'll be people willing to accept amount of money higher than their marginal benefit to not do it. So if we allow for bargaining, we actually will see that the market goes back to that socially efficient quantity. Now that can break down if we have high transaction costs, stubbornness, or coordination problems, right? But you'll see this, I think I mentioned in one of the slides last class, like tradable pollution permits, right? So the government, I forget where it was, they had these like rights to pollute, and you could buy them. Well, who do you think bought them? The companies that wanted to pollute the most. And who sold them? The companies for which polluting was like a relatively small market. Like, it didn't give them that much additional marginal benefit to produce those units. But we still saw that as they traded them, it pushed them back to a lower quantity, right? A lower total quantity of whatever good was causing that pollution. Okay? So taxes fix our negative externalities. Okay? Any other questions on this before we keep moving? So there are a couple empty slides. At this point, there's another couple things that could fix negative externalities. So what is something else that could push us to this lower socially efficient quantity? Even if we, let's say we have high transaction costs, coordination problems, even if we allow people to bargain and kind of, make agreements, we won't get back down to that socially efficient quantity. What else could I do here? Price what? Yeah, so I could say, well, I know that the socially efficient price is up here. If I impose a price floor, everybody past this quantity, if they now have to pay this higher price, their marginal benefit is below that. Nobody here will be purchasing this good anymore. We end up at this lower quantity. What else could I use? If I want a lower quantity, yeah, I could just set a quota so that the market can't get past that point. What else could I do? What if I imposed a price ceiling right here? Well, now, if I can't charge a price higher than this, every producer of this good, the benefit to them, the price is now below their marginal cost for these units. So they would stop at this lower quantity as well. So with negative externalities, we have a lot of tools: price ceilings, price floors, quotas, taxes. Right? And I even argue, those tradable permits. All right. Yeah. For the price ceiling. Yeah, so even though the price is being set lower, we were kind of saying this was the price that society would want if we were making a decision like letting this market operate off of society's benefits and society's costs. Here, imposing a price ceiling, we're not allowing that to occur. We're artificially reducing that quantity based off of setting the price, right? So we can set the price lower and it's still going to have the same impact, right? Price floors and price ceilings, they're both going to reduce quantity. One of them is just doing it in a way because producers are no longer willing to supply the good. The other one reduced our quantity because now there's consumers who are no longer willing to buy the good. So it's doing the same thing, just operating through kind of a different avenue. Any other questions on this before we keep moving? So let's now think about different types of goods and maybe how positive and negative externalities kind of relate to them. So public goods, you've probably heard this term before, but it's things like state parks or public parks that everybody can use. Another really good example, right? Like the interstate system is a public good, right? The government built it and we can now all use it. National defense, right? We all get to kind of enjoy the benefits of having a strong national defense. So here kind of the problem becomes if we don't have a government step in or we can't coordinate our actions as a society, is any one person going to be willing to pay for all of national defense? No, right? Everybody has some additional benefit, but the cost is so exorbitantly high, right? We're never going to see any one person buy that public good, right? Same kind of thing, I guess technically there probably are parks that people have purchase, right? Really wealthy individuals. But if we just relied on them, how many parks do we have? Not a whole lot, right? And so these public goods, we're going to say what probably exists is there are going to be positive externalities to these goods, right? So what did you say with positive externalities? The market is actually going to arrive at a quantity that is too low. That's public goods. We'll talk through a little bit more behind why, right? But the characteristics that we're going to start defining, we'll have 4 different types of goods. So one of them is public goods. And the things that define these goods, the characteristics, are whether or not they're excludable or non-excludable, and whether or not they're rival or non-rival. So all excludable means is that you can prevent people from using this good, right? Once it's produced and consumed, once it's out there in the market, you can't exclude anybody from enjoying the benefits of it, right? So you think about Wi-Fi, right? Or sorry, excuse me, non-excludable, I have second. So non-excludable, right? I can't prevent anybody else from using it. This would be something like national defense, right? Or these public parks. Or what's another kind of non-excludable? If there's a Wi-Fi somewhere without a password, it's not excludable, right? You can't prevent people from getting on it if you don't put a password, right? So non-excludable is something where you can't prevent people from using it once it's out there. Excludable is going to be most of the goods we think about that we consume in our everyday life, right? I go to Chipotle and I buy a burrito. Like once I have that burrito, I can exclude anybody else from getting to enjoy that burrito, right? I have the right for that. It's excluded, right? Now, kind of thinking about we can have similar goods and these characteristics can change. I could have a public Wi-Fi, which is not excludable, but my home internet service, what do I probably have on? So it is excludable. My neighbors can't use it, right? So this is kind of the idea of excludable, non-excludable. Different types of goods will have this trait. All public goods will be, well, they're public, they're free use, so they are non-excludable. Okay. Any questions on that idea? It shouldn't be too terrible here. Then we also have the characteristic of, is it rival or non-rival? Once again, the goods that we buy in everyday life, we probably are most common with rival goods. Once you buy that laptop, no one else can buy that specific laptop. Think about the same model, but you own yours, right? If I go buy my burrito at Chipotle, right? Once I consume that burrito, can anyone else consume it? I hope not, right? And so this is the idea of rival. Once you buy it, no one else can buy that specific unit or that product. Non-rival is going to be that once something is bought, right, other people can still buy it. How does that work, right? Well, I'm dating myself and now because I don't think people use this often, but iTunes Music, right? You go out and buy a song. You buying that song doesn't prevent anybody else from buying that exact same song, right? That product is out there and it can be purchased several times. So that we would say is non-rival. You buying it doesn't prevent anyone else, or you consuming it doesn't prevent anyone else from also consuming it, right? Or enjoying marginal benefit. National defense. You sitting here in this room enjoying the safety that national defense provides you doesn't prevent anybody else somewhere else from enjoying the marginal benefit that national defense provides. So public goods, we would say, are not excludable, but they're also going to be, once it's out there, right? I can go to a park at the same time as someone else and we both can enjoy the park, so it would be non-rival, right? So non-excludable, non-rival goods will be our public goods. Okay. So some other types of goods, and this is the combinations that we have. And I can't remember. Did I do a slide for each one of these? No. I'll just talk through them here. The easiest one, rival and excludable. These are most of the goods we buy every day, right? So I can't put, personal computers, right? A shirt. Once you buy it, no one else can buy that exact same shirt. It's also, you can prevent other people from wearing it, right? So a lot of the goods that we see are going to be what we just call private goods. They're both rival and excludable. Okay. Now, we might also have, and we won't really focus on these a lot, but the fourth category would be natural monopoly. Okay? So natural monopoly goods are going to be things that are non-rival, but excludable. Right? So this is kind of a weird one. If you think about like cable TV or internet service, right? Even if you have a password on your wireless connection at home, right? So that good would be excludable. Once you pay for it, you can exclude anyone from using your internet service. But does that prevent your neighbors from also buying internet from that company? No, right? So it's non-rival in the sense that you can buy it and so can other people, but it's excludable in that when you buy that unit, you can prevent anyone else from using that specific unit. Do you have a question?
What about like rights to music with the song?
So rights to a song would be definitely, well, those technically, I think the way that I don't know enough about the law behind it. I think those would technically be private goods, right? Because someone's going to own the rights to them, so they would be excludable. And as far as I know, only one person typically owns the rights to a song, so it should be rival and excludable there. Now you have some like free use songs, so like the Happy Birthday song. That's actually a public good because anyone can use it. There's no copyright on it, so it's not excludable. Also, you using it, everybody else can still use it, so it'd be non-rival. Another thing, instead of this cable, another natural monopoly. A lot of the times, like if you're looking at like any electric companies, a lot of times like utilities and specifically in different regions will kind of be these natural monopoly goods. And then the fourth kind of category we have, which are, I already did public goods. I pointed to the wrong one. Up here, common resources, right? So kind of use this example kind of as we talk about. So in Indiana, right, there's a lot of people that hunt deer. Right? And so if we didn't have any system set up in place, so like you go back to Wild West days, like with buffalo, if there's just these animals out roaming in the fields and I have no rules set up about who can hunt them, it's non-excludable, right? But as soon as someone kills one of those buffaloes, no one else can kill that same buffalo, right? So anytime we have these non-excludable but rival goods, we would think of these as common resources. So fish in the ocean, right? Once you catch a fish, no one can catch that same fish. But you go to like your local pond, you just cast it off the side. I mean, I know technically the DNR is probably going to be upset about that, but we're really, right? So non-excludable, kind of, I probably shouldn't have that recorded, but non-excludable and rival goods, this would be something we say are a common resource. Okay. So we'll kind of talk through some examples. of how characteristics can change a good. So before I do my example here, well, yeah, I want to do this example because I think it's worth going through first. So let's say I have the good is office hours, right? And I'm thinking about this is my office hours the first week of classes. Well, hopefully I've conveyed this to all of you, but what are office hours in terms of excludable or non-excludable? Yeah, non-excludable goods. You can show up. Everyone can use them. That first week of classes, how many people do you think I get stopped by for office hours? Not many, right? So when someone comes in, there's no, someone being in my office isn't preventing, and there's nobody waiting out in the hallway, right? So there I would say that someone using my office hours would be non-rival. It's not preventing anybody else. So we can have the same good, but if characteristics change about it, it might go from a public good to something else. So let's think about that same good. It's kind of weird to call it good, but maybe you guys might think it's a bad. That was a terrible joke. So let's say I'm thinking about office hours during exam week. Well, they still should be what? Non-excludable. Anybody can stop by. Now I reserve a room, so I kind of try to avoid this. But if I don't reserve a room, I only have 3 chairs in my office. What do you think ends up happening? Some of you were there. People are hanging out in the hallway, right? So those people being in my office are preventing other people from being able to use those office hours at that time. So the overuse, if this becomes like a really overused public good, what ends up happening? I now have a non-excludable, but a rival good. I was using buffaloes before as that example, but this would be a common resource. Right? So we can have different characteristics kind of change that same good to being a different category. So I've got another one where we can think about all 4 types, right? But I don't know, kind of starting out with this one. It's a relevant example to my life, but also kind of to your life as well, right? So what if I was thinking about roads, right? So if I wanted a public good as a road, that has to be what? Non-excludable and non-rival. So if I'm thinking about these differentiations of whether or not it's congested or uncongested, or just, is there traffic or not traffic? And then is it a toll road that you have to pay to use or a non-toll road? You can just hop on it, right? So non-excludable would be what? Yeah, a non-toll road. What would non-rival be? Well, if traffic gets so bad, at some point, people using that road prevents other people from using it. So in order for it to be non-rival, I would need it to be uncongested or a low amount of traffic. So our public goods would be an uncongested non-toll road. Now, what if that same good, what would make it a common resource? Well, we said that would be when it's still non-excludable. So it'd still be a non-toll road, right? Everyone can just get on and use it. But it's rival, so that if I'm using it, other people might not be able to. So I think about like 60, is it, I always get mixed up. So is it 65 out here or 69? Whatever the interstate is, right? If it's so busy that traffic can't merge onto it, it has now become rival, right? So a congested non-toll road would be our common resource, okay? What if I wanted a private good? So how do the government maybe turn this into a private good? Yeah, so what makes a private good rival and excludable? How do I make it excludable? I charge a price. It's a toll road, you have to pay to use it. And what makes it rival if it's very busy, right? Or there's a lot of traffic or a congested toll road. Now, we only have one left, but what would make it a natural monopoly? Well, this would be the idea that it is excludable, right? But it's non-rival, right? So what's an excludable good here? Making it a toll road, right? What is non-rival? Uncongested, right? So, excuse me, most toll roads, like there's a reason why the government chose certain roads to be that, because like they're the only major pathway between 2 locations. So they're generally not very congested, but they're usually like the only really efficient way of traveling between these 2 places. And so we turn them into a natural monopoly. You want to move quickly between these 2 places, you've got to use that road. So just kind of an example of seeing how the same good, if these traits change, we would classify it as a different type of good, okay? Any questions on that before we keep moving here? Okay with that? So where do I want to go with this? So we're talking about public goods. I'm now going to kind of relate these public goods to what we talked about last class, which was positive externalities. So I've got kind of just a little demand schedule example here. Let's say I have one individual and I'm thinking about what quantity would they choose. And I put law example here. Just thinking about like hiring police officers. I know the numbers don't make sense. Put it in thousands if you want, think about 50,000. Maybe it's their hourly wage rate. But Tom benefits from having a police officer in his town. The first one, the benefit is really high. Second, high, but not quite as high. As there's more and more police officers hired, his marginal benefit is declining, right, from each additional officer. If the price for one of these officers is $35, how many would Tom choose to hire? Well, would he hire the first one? His marginal benefit is 50, cost is 35, so yes. Second one, 40 is greater than 30, so yes. Third one, no. So that a quantity that Tom would choose is not going to be what's efficient for society if he's not the only person in that society. So if we think about instead, we have two individuals in the society. Once that first police officer is hired, it's not just Tom who's going to have a marginal benefit. The other people in that town enjoy the marginal benefit of having that police officer as well. So we would have Tom and Julie add both of their marginal benefits up to get society's marginal benefit, right? So if I was making this decision for society, would I hire that first officer at that same price of 35? Yes. Second one? Yes. Third one? Yes. Fourth one? Well, we say we do something up to as long as the marginal benefit is greater than or equal to that marginal cost, which is the price here. So yes, we hire that fourth officer. That would be the socially efficient quantity. Now, if we allow these individuals to make decisions on their own, will Jill hire any police officers? No, that first one isn't even, the price is higher than the marginal benefit. Tom would hire two, so our kind of market equilibrium would be a quantity of two, way below that socially efficient quantity, which tells us what? If the market isn't getting, as the market quantity is below what's efficient for society, we must have positive externalities, right? So these public goods existing, once that good is out there, everybody gets marginal benefit from it. So police officers, national defense, all these things, we're going to end up seeing that we have way, the market's going to arrive at a quantity that's way lower than what's socially efficient, right? So what is that going to kind of look like? Just to kind of revisit some things that we talked about last class. So anytime got a market that's currently arriving at its equilibrium point. And I didn't really focus as much on kind of society's like desired price last class, so that's why I'm kind of working it into the models here today. If I have positive externalities that exist from the provision of this public good, we said we're going to have additional benefits. So what represents benefits? Demand. So we said we always are going to model positive externalities through the demand curve. Okay? So we can model these positive externalities that at every quantity, the benefits to society or whatever the benefits were to the people in that market, plus some additional amount, right? Plus whatever this positive externality is. So where would society like this quantity to be? A little bit higher. And what would the resulting or kind of corresponding kind of price society want to be set as good? Also a little bit higher, right? Kind of leading us to this socially efficient point. Now, what is one way I can encourage the market to get to this higher quantity? Yeah, how do I incentivize people to do more of something? I give them money or I subsidize them, right? So I could give the consumers here a subsidy, and hopefully that pushes me out to that socially efficient quantity. So this is the idea of like subsidies for putting solar panels on your roof, right? Hopefully it's going to push the market, right, out to that socially efficient quantity, get more of that good. Okay? Any questions on that before we keep moving? So some of those slides I left blank when we were talking about like corrective subsidies, corrective taxes. We've kind of now talked about all those things, right? Corrective quotas. Now, with subsidies, problem is, what other tools do we have to increase quantity? Price ceilings, price floors, quotas all lowered it. We really only have subsidies when we're thinking about how we correct these positive externality markets. Okay? So we really only have one tool here when it comes to positive externalities. Okay? What else do I want to say here? I think that's it. Any other questions before I kind of go back to the slides here? Okay. So, so we've already talked about all of this, right? With positive externalities, we see it with these public goods. Common resources, we're going to actually kind of work through a model here in just a second, where we can see that they actually are negative externalities that exist in these common resource markets. And we've already talked about public policies. I just mentioned subsidies to fix positive externalities. We talked about all those things earlier to fix negative externalities, right? So some of these slides are a little bit fluff, so I'll go through them kind of quick. But this one's, I think, fairly interesting. So with public goods, what we can have is what we call the free rider problem. So once a public good is out there and everybody can use it, right, we're going to see people, right, there's no cost to them using it, so we're going to see a lot of people using it, right? Excuse me. The problem is, let's think about maybe like a group project, right? So if your professor didn't organize it in a very good way, and they just simply gave everybody in the group a grade for whatever the project was, right? They didn't like have people, I don't know what they all do, because I avoid group projects like the play, said all the people have to prove me how much of it they did and show me all this. So if you just turn this project in, everybody in the group gets whatever grade the project got. What do you think a lot of people are going to do? Well, once somebody does the work, essentially that work is a public good, right? Everybody else in the group enjoys the grade that work got. So what is their incentive for everyone to do? Rely on somebody else to do it. But if everybody has that incentive, what can end up happening? Nobody does any work, right? So it's the same kind of idea with public goods. If everybody else is relying on someone else to buy this public good, right? Put money into like, creating a nice public park for the town. Well, everybody's going to want to rely on someone else to do it, because if somebody else does it, my cost is zero. My benefit is the same as if I made it myself, right? So this free rider problem can lead to public goods being at a quantity that's too low. Same thing our models would kind of predict. Okay. So I mentioned, like, I think a lot of these public goods. Oh, the one I put things in here that I think I'll forget. So I talked about public parks, defense, firefighters, cops, things like that. So most of these things, because we wouldn't get enough of them, most of these things are provided through who? So who provides firefighters? Government, right? We know that society has a huge marginal benefit, but we know one individual, right? We have the free rider problem. No one individual is going to start hiring police officers. In fact, probably that could cause some negative externalities for society, right? So generally, when we think we have these high marginal social benefits, these public goods, we try to kind of coordinate society's actions, and we kind of try to provide it through the government, which we then all pay a little bit of money through taxes, things like that. Now, the one I have here that I didn't talk about is kind of this knowledge through scientific research. So this applies to most technologies, but I'm going to pick on the pharmaceutical industry. So with drugs, like, there's usually patents, right? If you come up with a new drug, you have a patent to it and no one else can use it, right? Because if there were no patent system, as soon as I come up with a new drug and it's out there on the market, what is every other company going to do? It's going to reverse engineer it, produce the exact same thing, right? It's just chemical compounds. They can figure out exactly what it is, and they can reproduce it themselves. In which case, they put zero money into the development of that drug, but they still get to use it because there's no patents. It's essentially, it's a public good. Once it's out there, everybody else now has the information about how to make it. So with this kind of knowledge, right, we didn't have a patent system. Any new advancement in technology or any new drugs essentially would be a public good, and the free rider problem would exist. And so what happens? No company wants to put any money into trying to find a new drug, right? In fact, there's some of that going on right now because our different countries have different patent laws, and maybe another country, someone in the US comes up with something, and someone in another country, they don't really necessarily respect our patent laws, right? They can just reverse engineer that and produce it themselves, right? So there's less of an incentive for these companies to kind of put money towards coming up with these new technological advancements, unless we start to have these like legal protections, right? In which case, once I have the legal protection, what did I make that good? Well, it's now not excludable. It's now not non-excludable. It is now excludable, right? And it is kind of liable because once you buy one of those pills, no one else can buy that exact pill. So we kind of turn it into a private. I think about it that way. What else do I want to say? I think I kind of, I kind of already mentioned this. So how do we see these public goods being provided? We kind of have to rely on the government or a third party to really do some cost benefit analysis, right? We're going to collect a little bit of money from everybody. So we know that every single person is going to have a minor cost, but as long as the total cost, the total amount of tax money we took from every single person for this one thing, as long as that's less than the marginal social benefit, we should choose to do that. So once again, this is probably one of more of my fluff slides here. I want to save some time for some stuff I think is interesting kind of towards the end, right? So with common resources, we said they are not excludable, but we said they're also rival, right? So, public goods like, common resources, they're both not excludable. The problem with common resources is they're rival in consumption. So once someone shoots that buffalo, no one else can shoot the same buffalo. So what do we see happen? Okay. Well, we already talked about earlier negative externalities. I think I've got something in the slides, but I'll just redraw it. So if we model those negative externalities with common resources through our supply curve, we end up seeing that the socially efficient quantity is lower than what the market gets to. We can always model, and I'm going to do this. Anytime you're solving a problem, do not do it this way. But I'm just going to prove to you it doesn't matter how we model these external costs. And if you were to Google it, a lot of the times with these common resources, see them modeled this way for whatever reason. So let's say, I don't know. Got some supply curve. We've got our demand curve. Here's the equilibrium price and quantity the market will arrive at. So if I think about something like a common resource, let's go back to I think I mentioned deer hunting earlier, right? We don't allow it to be a public good. Right? We don't allow it, we don't allow it to be a common resource. We kind of change it. I'll kind of mention how. But if it truly was a common resource, you could just go out today and shoot and kill as many deer as you want. Right? So you don't have to worry about it, right? So if we just allow there to be a free-for-all, what's going to happen? People are going to start filling their freezers with a lot more deer, right? The problem is, if everybody's killing 8 deer a year, what happens to the deer population? It can't replenish itself, right? So for every single additional deer that's killed, it's less likely, it's harder for that population to replenish itself, making the actual benefits of that good, of those animals, less and less as we overhunt them. So it's almost like we have this negative externality as we hunt more and more of these deer, right? Because as we hunt more and more of them, it's decreasing the chance or the likelihood they can repopulate. So usually we would model negative externalities through our supply curve, but we can also model them this way. You can also think about as people hunt more and more of this good, or more and more of these deer, yes, there's additional costs, but saying there's additional costs, it's really the exact same thing as saying, as we're killing more deer, there's going to be less available. So the additional benefits that exist from having deer out there are going to be lower, right? So you can model negative externalities through your demand curve. It just would be, because they're like additional costs, it would be like your marginal benefits are whatever they were before, minus some amount, right? We're missing out on some marginal benefit. It's just a different way of saying the same thing, right? Additional costs is like a decrease in benefits. So what would that model, if we did choose to do that, what would it predict? That socially efficient quantity is actually going to be too low, right? So it doesn't matter how we model these negative externalities, we end up with the outcome that the socially efficient quantity is lower than what the market will arrive at, right? We want that efficient quantity for society to be a little bit lower, because if we hunt deer at this lower amount, what happens? The population can kind of continue kind of nice and steady, right? There's the same supply of deer year after year after year after year. So we don't allow people to just go out willy-nilly and start killing as many deer as they want. What does the government do? Any of you deer hunters here? What do you have to get to kill a deer legally? Well, you have to have a license, but then you also only get a certain amount of tax, right? I forget, is in Indiana, is it $1 and 2 doe or 1 doe? I was gonna say they kind of all, okay. Okay, so, so they essentially, what they're kind of doing in a way, because they make you pay for a license, it's kind of like they've used actually 2 tools. One, they imposed if you want to reduce quantity, what can you do? Impose a tax. It was an additional cost to you to actually go, so they kind of tax you in a weird way. Or you can also think about it, if they're only giving you a certain number of deer that you can kill, they've also established so they kind of use a combination of the 2 to get us back down to a more socially efficient quantity. Okay? I don't know, so maybe a somewhat relevant example living in Indiana, we can kind of think about with these common resources, we want to reduce the quantity that we would see if we just allow this market to be completely free and open, right? If we just allow this common resource to be, overhunted essentially. Excuse me. We got plenty of time left. So let's go back here. I've got some examples here. We talked about the toll road ones, clean air and water. And we want to make sure that, we're not seeing, too many people, people using way too much water so that there's not enough for other people. Really, the best way I would anchor my thought of common resources is like any type of wildlife that's hunted, right? So fish, whales, deer, go back to the buffalo example, because that's actually kind of a good example. The government didn't step in there, right? So for each individual, right, the optimal decision was to go out and kill as many buffalo as they could. The problem was that almost completely did what to the buffalo population? Eliminated it. So now, if I drove something to extinction, what's the total surplus that now exists in that market? It's gone, right? So total surplus is now 0. So if we don't prevent these common resources from becoming overused, not only will we see like a dead weight loss, like in the current time period, in the long run, we actually see a lot of dead weight loss because that market just goes away, right? If we drive these animals to extinction or we use this common resource, like we cut down all of our forests, now that market isn't there anymore, right? So we want to try to make sure that we kind of regulate these common resources so that doesn't happen. Another way of thinking about this common resources and kind of this overuse, we'll generally call this the tragedy of the commons. So if the government doesn't step in, any one individual has an incentive to go out and hunt that and kill that buffalo. Right? They don't care about what's going to happen at negative externality to society. So what happens over time as this gets overused, bluefin tuna is another good example where there wasn't really anyone regulating how many bluefin tuna that these companies or these fishing boats were catching. And so they couldn't repopulate quick enough. The population started to dwindle, and now we didn't have as many available for the world, for society. Right? So this overuse is what we would call tragedy of the commons. Nobody was factoring in this additional cost to everybody else from what their behavior was, right? They just cared that they were getting the fish that they could then go sell to the market. They didn't care that because they overfished, subsequent generations aren't going to have any fish to actually go out and catch. So another way of thinking about this tragedy of the common, what do I have? I have like a overgrazing example. So if you had like this free open, I think this exists out west, where it is like fields that anybody can bring their livestock to feed on. Did I put the name in here? They're like a free graze. I forget exactly what they call them. So what happens if you could take your livestock over and have them feed in this field for free? What happens? Everybody doesn't let their livestock eat their fields. They just bring them over to this common. Well, what happens? If all the livestock in the area are just feeding in this one field, it becomes good, right? And then it goes away, right? And so the overuse of these common resources, we call this tragedy of the commons. People weren't factoring in this huge negative externality that existed because of the overuse. Another example I'll give you, I don't know, how many of you live in dorms? Maybe this will connect with some of you. So if you ever have like a roommate, or if you live in like a communal area, let's say there was no staff, custodial staff in the dorms, right? And you have like a common shared area where maybe it's like, I don't know if they have this in the dorms, like a little kitchenette, like, you know, maybe there's like a microwave, like, let's do a microwave. It's really relevant to me because if you guys have been in my office, there's a room down the hall and there's a shared microwave for everybody. Well, what do you think? So it's a common resource in the sense that like it's not excludable, and if someone else is using it, I can't use it at the same time. Right? Is there any incentive for anybody to clean that microwave? No. So what do you think happens to that microwave? It's a disaster, right? It gets overused to the point where what do people not even want to do? Use that microwave. It's the same type of idea here, right? We see that people, they don't factor in these additional costs. Me not cleaning up after myself, I'm just doing what makes me the best off in the moment. I don't care that if I'm in a shared door, you know, I don't care that I just left the microwave a disaster for the next person, right? So I don't clean it. Well, everybody, if we all kind of do the same thing to that microwave, eventually it gets to a point where it's really not even something anyone wants to use. That market's completely gone away. Kind of a dumb example, but it kind of highlights this tragedy to come. If you hang around, you know, economists enough, we see this in way too many places, but you'll see the tragedy of the commons in a lot of different areas. The other one I'll throw out there, if you guys ever drive around Bloomington, there is a place where those who may not have homes like to hang out. It's called Seminary Park, and nobody is cleaning that. Like the local government is apparently just hands off because you drive by and it looks like a bomb went off, right? There's just trash everywhere, right? The same kind of idea. It's free and open to use, right? Everybody's overusing it, so it becomes a thing that really no one else, you know, it's a disaster. So, tragedy of the commons. I kind of have already talked about the hunting and fishing licenses, kind of using taxes, but also using quotas. Another one that's kind of interesting, we talked a little bit earlier about auctioning off permits. I think this was the FCC did this for like radio waves, and allowed for people to kind of auction, basically auction off the rights to these different airwaves, because if too many people are trying to put out too many signals at the same time, none of them work, and so we needed to kind of limit that quantity, right? So just kind of another example there. I don't really want to waste time on this. I'm not going to ask you guys questions on this. We already talked about establishing quotas. Like I said, a lot of this was kind of some fluff stuff. I do have two things that I want to do. So the first, I guess people won't get this in the recording.